The enigma of human behavior has always captivated researchers. There is something deeply intriguing about why we act the way we do and how the invisible threads that govern our daily rituals are formed. Today's narrative will delve into the fascinating world of the science behind habit formation, unraveling the mysteries of our automatic existence. We will learn how to break undesirable behaviors and, equally important, how to cultivate beneficial ones. At its core, a habit is nothing more than an automated action, triggered by a specific cue and performed almost without conscious thought. Think of brushing your teeth in the morning. You don't analyze each movement or contemplate it. The process simply unfolds on its own. This remarkable automaticity is a direct result of the strengthening of neural connections in the brain over time. The brain, being an incredibly efficient system, strives for energy conservation. Once it recognizes a sequence of actions that consistently leads to a reward, it immediately optimizes that pathway, turning it into a habit. Central to understanding this process is the concept of the habit loop, brilliantly popularized by Charles Duhigg in his renowned book, The Power of Habit. This loop consists of three fundamental elements: the cue, the routine, or action, and the reward. Let us delve into each of them to unlock their hidden potential. The cue is the initial trigger that prompts your brain to switch into automatic mode. It can take various forms: a specific time of day, a particular place, an emotional state, or even a preceding action. For example, for many people, waking up becomes an irresistible cue to check their phone. The routine is the behavior itself, the embodiment of the habit. In our phone example, this means picking up the device and diving into an endless scroll of social media. And finally, the reward. This is the positive outcome that reinforces the habit, making the brain want to repeat the action. For the person checking their phone, the reward might be the thrilling novelty of new information, a feeling of connection to the world, or simply a dopamine release triggered by incoming notifications. Understanding this habit loop is crucial for both eliminating undesirable behaviors and cultivating beneficial ones. If you aim to break a bad habit, the first step is to identify its cue and reward, and then consciously change the routine itself. For instance, if your cue for stress eating is anxiety and the reward is temporary comfort, you might try replacing food with a short walk outdoors or deep breathing exercises. Conversely, to form a good habit, you need to establish clear cues and desirable rewards. Want to exercise more? Lay out your workout clothes the night before. Cue. Go to the gym, routine, and reward yourself with a refreshing healthy smoothie or the satisfying feeling of accomplishment. The key to success lies in consistency. Repetition, day after day, strengthens these neural connections, making new behaviors automatic. This requires time and patience, but with persistent effort, even the most challenging changes become a part of your life. It's important to remember that even the smallest, most consistent steps lead to grand transformations over time. And with that, our deep dive into the world of habits concludes. But the narrative continues, and now we embark on an exciting journey following in the footsteps of legendary Viking explorers, Erik the Red and Leif Erikson. Could these fearless seafarers truly have crossed the Atlantic Ocean 5 centuries before Christopher Columbus's famous voyage? To unravel this mystery, we will undertake an expedition that will lead us through Denmark, where we will examine authentic Viking ships, then journey to Iceland to explore ancient ruins, lose ourselves among Greenland's gigantic icebergs, and finally, set foot on the shores of the New World. We seek the truth, undeterred by difficulties, for at any second our journey could take an unexpected turn, casting us into turbulent waters. According to ancient Viking sagas, it took Erik the Red and Leif Erikson almost an entire lifetime to successfully cross the Atlantic. We do not have such a luxury of time, but our goal is to meticulously retrace their legendary path and imaginatively recreate what their epic journey might have been like. Irish, Welsh, and even Chinese. Many peoples have claimed precedence in the discovery of America, but it is the Viking claims that remain the most compelling. Icelandic sagas abound with tales of Viking explorers who, hungry for new lands, pushed ever further west from their Scandinavian homeland. Iceland was settled first, around 860 AD, but within a century, most of the habitable land was occupied. Pushing even further west, they discovered and settled a vast icy island, which they named Greenland. It is at this point that Viking legends make a truly extraordinary claim. A Viking seafarer named Leif Erikson, navigating the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic, reached the American continent 500 years before Christopher Columbus. But could this bold legend be true? To find the answer, we traveled to the ancient Viking port of Roskilde, located in Denmark. Here lies the world's largest collection of authentic Viking ships, which have been meticulously reconstructed and carefully preserved. Our task was to determine whether the Vikings possessed vessels capable of withstanding the harsh trials of the open ocean. Maritime archaeologist Anton Engler guided us through this unique collection. He pointed to one of the ships, built around the 1030s, noting that other vessels dated to the same historical period. The team spent 21 years reconstructing all 5 ships, and they now proudly sail the waters of the fjord. The reconstruction was based on original findings, and there is no room for guesswork in these replicas. These ships had once sunk, but were protected over time by a thick layer of silt at the bottom of the fjord. In fact, the vessels were so well preserved that the team was able to create exact replicas, on which they sail to this day. Viking ship Captain Gunnar Egertsen demonstrated how the Norse seafarers created vessels capable of traversing the vastness of the Atlantic Ocean. Gunnar explained that the design of these ships allowed them to adapt flexibly to the movement of the waves. However, if a longship, which once struck terror into the hearts of coastal communities across northern Europe, had attempted a transatlantic voyage, it would have inevitably fallen apart. This is why the Vikings developed a completely different type of vessel for long voyages, similar to the one presented. This was a cargo vessel. Gunnar has extensive personal experience sailing Viking ships. In 2000, he built an exact replica of such a ship, precisely 1,000 years after. According to Viking legends, Leif Erikson made his historic voyage. Gunnar successfully sailed his ship from Iceland to North America. His 2,600-mile journey served as undeniable proof that Viking ships were capable of crossing the Atlantic. The presented ship, built from Norwegian pine, was as authentic as the vessel Gunnar had created. Its sail was made with full adherence to Viking technologies. Square panels of woven wool were sewn together and then treated with a tar-like substance. It covered an area of nearly 1,000 square feet and weighed over half a ton. Life on a Viking ship involved colossal physical exertion. The winch was the only mechanical device on board, and the use of brute physical force was a mandatory condition. 1,000 years ago, the Vikings acted in precisely the same way. They used the same sails, performed the same movements. With a favorable wind, this ocean training vessel could reach speeds of up to 13 knots, which is about 15 miles per hour. It was designed to carry up to 24 tons of cargo, but required a crew of only 8 people. However, Gunnar is not just an experienced Viking ship sailor. Amazingly, a few years ago, he discovered that he is a direct descendant of Eric the Red and Leif Erikson. The ability to tack against the wind represented a revolutionary achievement for the Vikings. They had to rotate the sail and perform a series of zigzag turns. While it was extremely hard work, it allowed them to make progress even if the wind blew directly at them. Viking ships were more than capable of open ocean sailing. Nevertheless, it took more than just courage to leave home and venture into the unknown. They must have had a real, powerful motivation. These ships offered little protection from the harsh Atlantic weather. Perhaps Norway became too crowded due to high taxes, and everyone sought to move to Iceland. Within 60 years, 30,000 people migrated to Iceland. It is unknown how many ships made the voyage from Scandinavia to Iceland, but to transport 30,000 people, there must have been dozens of vessels making that journey. The Vikings tried to stay within sight of land, but to cross the Atlantic, they had to leave the safety of the shores and set a course across miles of open sea. Gunnar explained that the magnetic compass was not introduced in Europe for another 200 years. How then did they navigate? Gunnar, based on his experience, revealed that they relied on environmental clues, the direction of prevailing winds, the presence of whales and seabirds, and even the type of seaweed floating on the surface. Some researchers even believe that the Vikings understood the relationship between the sun and latitude. This wooden disc, found at a Viking settlement in Greenland, may have been a sun compass, a tool used to determine if the ship was holding its course. With a good wind, a Viking captain could sail 600 miles to Iceland in 4 or 5 days. As for Eric the Red, a man with a reputation for trouble, he had been nearly overthrown in Norway. He had to leave. Eric the Red had no choice but to depart. In 986 AD, Eric the Red set off into the North Atlantic, heading for Iceland. The narrator is also heading there, to find his home in the wild northwest of Iceland. He follows the path of the Viking warrior Eric the Red, a man who seemed to constantly get into difficulties. In 982 AD, under threat of death, he left his home in Iceland and sailed west to found a new colony on the vast icy land of Greenland. Iceland is a large island, roughly the size of Kentucky, but most of its interior is uninhabitable. Most people, even today, live on the coast. The story of Eric's life and times is captured in the Icelandic sagas, a unique and valuable collection of oral traditions. They can tell much about the people who settled here 1,200 years ago. The narrator is about to meet a saga expert precisely where Eric is said to have lived, 120 miles north of the capital. But is it possible that a 1,000-year-old oral history could be so geographically accurate? According to his map, this is Eric's farm, where Eric the Red lived. This is fascinating, the first Viking longhouse. Isli Sigurdsson, from the University of Iceland, has dedicated his entire career to studying the Icelandic sagas. The items hanging here are authentic Viking period tools. They are not only exhibits, but are also used for work. This is a Viking sword, a completely authentic replica. And this is a Viking helmet. Unfortunately, there are not many of them in archaeology, but enough to prove that they did not have horns. Isli explained that the idea of horned helmets was introduced into culture by artists, so it's a myth. Vikings did not have horned helmets, only leather ones, or ones like this, very skillfully made. This is a battle helmet. This was an amazingly comfortable and significantly warmer shelter, despite the light smoke lingering in the air and the dampness outside the walls. Inside this structure, 20 to 30 people could find refuge. The observer noted that the outer walls were entirely made of earth. Isli, the local expert, explained that this structure, reaching 60 feet long and 20 feet wide, was a typical example of architecture from that time. Wood was a scarce resource and was used exclusively for creating the framework. The Vikings extensively used turf for the exterior cladding, which could be up to 6 feet thick. This provided excellent insulation against the harsh, freezing winters. Once the door was securely shut and a fire burned in the hearth, one could feel true comfort inside. Isli, a recognized saga expert, revealed that there is much evidence about the Vikings and the settlement of Iceland, recorded in sagas written in the 13th to 14th centuries. He clarified that these sagas were not created by eyewitnesses, but were transcriptions of oral accounts of significant events that occurred 200 years before their recording. What do the sagas say about Eric the Red? The sagas recount that Eric arrived in this area and married a local farmer's daughter. The farmer allotted them land in this valley, where Eric established his farm. Archaeological investigations confirm that this land bears the same names, and artifacts found date to the same time period. Archaeologists have been able to prove that this was not only Eric's farm, but also that the outlines of the walls found just beyond the reconstructed structure are the actual ruins of Eric's house. However, Isli explained that Eric did not get the best piece of land after marrying the farmer's daughter. His holdings were located at the very edge of the family's property and in close proximity to a neighboring farm. Eric did not stay here long before he was defeated in a fierce land dispute. He was outlawed again. He had to leave the country quite quickly, as in those days, anyone could seize him. Eric had already been banished from the Viking lands of Scandinavia, so he had no choice but to continue moving west. Rumors circulated about a land sighted by a sailor who had been blown off course. With nowhere else to go, Eric decided to find and settle this new land. He persuaded some of his relatives and friends to join him, promising untold riches from trading its resources. Eric the Red set off for Greenland, but over 20 ships and many people could not foresee what awaited them. Even today, reaching remote southwestern Greenland remains a challenge. This journey takes 3 days and involves flights on 1 plane and 2 helicopters, as well as a boat trip. It is there that the search will be conducted for evidence that Eric and his followers truly made this cold, barren land their home. The explorer follows the path of the Viking warrior Eric the Red, a man who seemed to constantly find himself in difficult situations. In 985 AD, under threat of death, he left his home in Iceland and journeyed west to establish a new colony on the vast icy land known as Greenland. Today, even with air travel, getting to southern Greenland is not easy. The first leg of the journey is a 3-hour flight to Kulusuk, located on the country's east side. From the relative warmth and safety of the plain, it was impossible not to notice the very cold, iceberg-filled sea stretching below. Eric's journey was undoubtedly treacherous, requiring a combination of determination, skill, and luck. Only 14 of the 25 ships that sailed with Eric reached their destination. The others either turned back or perished at sea. Approaching Greenland, there was a strong sense of excitement. It's one of those places you feel you'll never visit. This is Greenland. It could have been called Rocky Land or Snowy Land. It would hardly be called Greenland. It seems Eric the Red embellished reality a bit, being a man full of creativity. But this place is far from the final destination. Over 1,000 more miles of snow and ice remain to be traversed. This tiny airport is merely a stopover on the way to Greenland's more populated west coast. The journey began with a flight from Reykjavik to Kulusuk. Now, the goal was to fly along the Arctic Circle to Nuuk, the capital, and then transfer to another plane heading to where Eric the Red settled in the south. Greenland spans over 850,000 square miles, more than 3 times the size of Texas. In all this vast territory, only 85,000 people live, but the Vikings settled specifically here, in the south. It remained to be discovered why, once the destination was reached. As soon as the plane took off, it was over glaciers and ice fields that cover most of this enormous island. If all the ice here melted, global sea levels would rise by nearly 20 feet. After another 3 hours, the ice gave way to rock, and the capital, Nuuk, was reached. After a brief stop, a transfer was made to an even smaller plane heading south. Now, a fellow traveler had joined. Carolina Salsa, an expert, joined the traveler for this leg of the journey. They were heading to see Eric the Red settlement. Carolina had moved here from Denmark to study Viking settlements, and she would be the guide in Greenland. They flew south on a tiny plane from Nuuk, covering 400 miles to Narsarsuaq, the area Eric chose for his settlement. As they approached their destination, Carolina pointed out that the area they were flying over was called Eric's Fjord. This is the very land that Eric and his followers first settled in Greenland. The travelers were approaching the final point of their route. Only the last leg remained, which they would have to cover by helicopter. This long journey was undoubtedly worthwhile, as the surrounding landscape unfolded in all its splendor, breathtakingly beautiful. However, even today, this territory is an extremely difficult place to live. There are no conventional road or rail networks whatsoever. The only practical way to move between the numerous and extremely isolated settlements remains air transport. After a 12-hour journey from Iceland, the group finally reached the region that once served as home for the ancient Viking settlers. Nevertheless, the most fully preserved artifacts and evidence of their existence were still a significant distance away, several hours' journey, requiring the use of a boat and a further trek on foot. After a wonderfully restful night, the group prepared for further movement towards the northern settlement. Here, something truly astonishing awaited them. For the first time, a majestic iceberg appeared before their eyes. Observing this colossal ice formation was a truly captivating and unforgettable experience. The deep blue hue of the ice, its ethereal beauty, seemed to demand personal presence to fully grasp its magnificence. Having completed this brief but impressive detour, the travelers returned to their main route. The destination was a 2-day trek from the nearest inhabited settlement, which necessitated setting up camp for the night. Part of this journey would be covered by water, by boat, but nevertheless, a long and challenging road still lay ahead. A notable feature of the local flora is the abundance of driftwood, which, having traveled vast distances, washes ashore here from remote regions, Siberia, Canada, North America, or Europe. This floating timber was undoubtedly actively used by the Vikings in their daily lives. As Carolina, the expert accompanying the group, explained, This entire vast region likely looked almost identical to what the first settlers saw when they arrived here over 1,000 years ago. This place served as a kind of central hub for the eastern settlements. It was quite a large settlement, where the outlines of ancient houses and other structures are still clearly visible. Although the land here seemed green and lush, there were not many suitable flat areas for raising livestock brought from Iceland. The settlers had to be particularly careful in choosing locations for their farms. Ideal for farming were areas where the mountain ridge gently sloped towards the fjord, providing necessary protection and access to water. The journey to the ruins took the group another 3 hours. During this trek, Carolina shared valuable information, explaining that Viking settlements are scattered throughout this vast territory, but the place to which she was leading her companions was the most recent and, importantly, the best preserved. She herself was actively involved in ongoing archaeological research, striving to gain a deeper understanding of the daily lives of these ancient inhabitants and to unravel the reason for their mysterious disappearance. Before them lay the ruins of a once thriving settlement. This was an extensive site, serving as home to one large family. This place, along with several others, had been carefully excavated by archaeologists, allowing for a fairly complete understanding of the settlers' lives. It is known that they kept cattle for dairy products and sheep for wool. Fish formed the basis of their diet, providing necessary nutrients. In the summer months, they undertook long hunting expeditions, venturing far north. Carolina strongly wished for the research group to visit this specific site, not only because of its exceptional preservation, but also because it was the first place discovered by the legendary Eric the Red. Subsequently, having decided to settle elsewhere, he transferred this land to his cousin, which convincingly demonstrates the significance and value of this site. Remarkably, only 3 farms across all of Greenland have revealed similar storage pits, which unequivocally indicates the significant wealth and status of the owner. Furthermore, a church is located within the settlement. Valsey Church is recognized as one of the best preserved Viking structures. Its construction dates back to the 12th century, when Christian missionaries arrived in Greenland from Scandinavia, approximately 200 years after Eric the Red and the first settlers. Carolina also reported that the last known mention of a Viking event in Greenland refers to a wedding that took place precisely in this church in 1408, shortly before the colonists mysteriously disappeared from these lands. The exact reason why this Viking settlement was abandoned remains a subject of scientific debate, but Carolina had very convincing hypotheses on the matter. She believed that this place was, in essence, the last stronghold of the Vikings in Greenland. A combination of factors, such as changing climate, increasing difficulties in importing necessary goods, the cessation of ships arriving from Europe, and consequently, the lack of trade items, ultimately led to their decline. Although archaeologists continue to actively debate the specific reasons why the Viking settlement in Greenland was abandoned, there is no doubt about the location where Eric the Red established his first settlement over 1,000 years ago, and this historical period and territory served as the central focus of this research. Despite the seriousness of the topic, the travelers had a very pleasant time. It was well past 11 at night, but it was still bright outside, almost daylight, which is normal for this time of year at these latitudes. The next day, they were to discover how treacherous and challenging navigation in Greenlandic waters could be, and also learn how Eric's son, Leif, undertook his own, even more dangerous, Atlantic crossing. The explorer embarked on a grand journey across the Atlantic Ocean, following in the footsteps of the most celebrated Viking explorer, Eric the Red. By this point, he had already managed to ascertain how Eric made his Atlantic crossing, starting from continental Europe and reaching Iceland. Soon after, Eric was expelled from Iceland, which prompted him to become the first to explore and subsequently settle the vast, ice-covered expanses of Greenland. Having now traversed a significant portion of this land, the explorer was convinced that the territory that greeted the first settlers still retains its pristine beauty. He also witnessed how developed the Viking settlement in Greenland had become. Archaeologists estimate the colony's total population may have exceeded 2,000 people. Initially, climatic conditions were favorable enough for agriculture. However, experts suggest that gradually encroaching colder temperatures played a key role in the colony's eventual disappearance from Greenland. According to the Greenlandic sagas, approximately 450 individuals chose this specific area as their permanent home. Researchers even know the exact location where Eric the Red himself resided, and it was there they intended to head next. The place Eric the Red chose for his personal dwelling was located about 20 miles from his initial settlement point, in a neighboring fjord that now proudly bears his name. During their trek, Carolina shared an interesting detail. Archaeological discoveries concerning Viking settlements began relatively recently, only in the early 20th century. Before them lay the very spot where Eric once lived. The travelers were greeted by an incredible sight: countless icebergs drifting on the water's surface. As these gigantic ice masses slowly melt and break apart in the sea, a distinctive, loud, and explosive crack echoes throughout the fjord, creating a unique and unforgettable acoustic experience. Eric the Red's former farm is situated in a remote corner of the fjord, and the path to it leads past hundreds of majestic icebergs. While this place is undoubtedly one of the most picturesque they had ever seen, it's important to remember that for the first settlers, it represented an extremely isolated and harsh environment, where winter survival remains challenging even today. The Vikings hunted seals, walruses, and narwhals not only for sustenance, but also for trade. Furs, hides, and especially narwhal tusks were highly valued in their homeland. However, with the introduction of ivory to Europe, the demand for Viking tusks significantly declined, leading to the loss of a vital source of income for the settlers. Today, these icebergs may appear beautiful, but for the 24 ships that sailed with Eric from Iceland to Greenland, they posed a serious threat. Nevertheless, it was impossible to resist the temptation to approach them. A request was made to the captain for the opportunity to step onto one of these unstable ice formations. He attempted to find a sufficiently flat area suitable for standing, but warned that if one fell into the water, there would be only a few minutes to return to the vessel before hypothermia set in. Even from a distance, icebergs can suddenly explode or flip, ejecting enormous chunks of ice. Despite the relatively modest size of this particular iceberg, touching it raised doubts about the wisdom of climbing it. It's important to remember that 78% of an iceberg's mass is hidden underwater, and at any moment, it could have capsized, plunging a person into the icy abyss. It was a brief but invaluable experience. The journey from Iceland had taken 3 days and required half a dozen flights. Now, there was hope to finally see the place Eric had chosen as his home on this vast, isolated island, located at the edge of the known world. It wasn't until the 1930s that the ruins in Brattle were definitively identified as Eric the Red's farm and have since undergone extensive excavation. Parts of it have even been reconstructed. Clearly, Eric the Red had settled in well here. Research on this farm revealed it was the best choice for his family. The area held a central position in the eastern settlement and boasted a convenient harbor. Eric settled here to lead a respectable family life. His eldest child is mentioned in Iceland, but his 3 subsequent children were born at this very spot. Carolina recounted that Eric's settlement here coincided with the arrival of Christianity from continental Europe. There's even a story of how they persuaded Gilder, Eric's wife, to convert to Christianity. She wished for a church to be built there. However, Eric refused to build it, and Gilder, in turn, refused to have anything to do with him and would not share his bed until the church was constructed. He then picked up a stone and threw it as far as he could from the farm, and where that stone landed, they built a church that might have looked very similar to the current reconstruction. Around the time this small church was being built, the character of the Vikings began to change across all the lands they had settled. Many started converting to Christianity. Leif was one of the first converts and embodied the new Viking. He inherited his father's spirit of adventure, but rejected his wild and superstitious customs. According to the sagas, Leif was a golden Viking, described as a large, strong man, thoughtful and moderate in all things, and highly respected. He became an accomplished sailor, transporting goods to Iceland and Scandinavia from his father's settlement here in Greenland. He earned the name Leif the Lucky after saving a shipwrecked crew and claiming all their cargo. This place was likely the center of his home, and it had been a long journey to see the best view in Greenland. It was a very long journey to reach Eric and Leif's final home here in Greenland. Standing amidst the ruins of Eric's actual home, It became clear that Eric's epic journey concluded here. Leif, however, set out from where his father left off. He had heard rumors of land to the west. Leif was the one most eager to discover it. He acquired his ship and convinced over 30 men to follow him. At this point in the epic story, the father yields to the son. From now on, it is Leif's journey. In 1000 AD, Leif Erikson departed from this shore on a ship with 35 men, with no real maps or idea of where they were going or what they would find. Did Leif the Lucky truly reach America? The crossing of the Atlantic concludes in search of archaeological evidence that could confirm that the epic saga of the Viking explorers is not a myth. The path has been followed by Viking explorers across the Atlantic, attempting to uncover the truth about their adventures recounted in the Icelandic sagas. Evidence has been found that the Vikings colonized both Iceland and Greenland. But the most incredible saga states that in 1000 AD, Leif the Lucky made a treacherous journey across the North Atlantic and discovered North America 500 years before Columbus. Now, the northern tip of Newfoundland is approaching. It's about 1,000 miles from Greenland to here, and this may be the end of the Viking trail that was followed. Some claim that 1,000 years ago, Leif the Lucky and his expedition first landed on these shores, and, as one can only imagine, with a sense of pride and jubilation. The saga of the Greenlanders states that Leif encountered Baffin Island, which he named Helluland, then headed south, moving along the coast of Labrador, which he named Markland. Finally, he landed at the northern tip of Newfoundland, which he named Vinland, because, it is claimed, they found grapes there. The author's voice is focused, thoughtful, and analytical, striving for objectivity. So far, the explorer has managed to uncover undeniable evidence confirming the historical accuracy of the journeys described in the ancient Icelandic sagas. However, it is important to remember that oral traditions cannot always serve as entirely reliable factual documents. For centuries, there have been many tales and myths about ancient mariners who purportedly first reached the shores of America. The Welsh, Irish, and even the Chinese all claimed precedence in discovering this continent. Yet to date, no archaeological confirmation of their presence has been found on any American soil. A natural question arises. Is the Viking claim different in this regard? At the northern tip of Newfoundland Island lies a unique site known as Lance aux Meadows. Here, on a plot long mistakenly believed to be an indigenous camp, a small settlement consisting of sod houses has now been meticulously reconstructed. Dale Wells serves as the curator of this historic site. The ruins that formed the basis for the reconstruction were discovered by Dr. Helge Ingstad, who deliberately set out to find the legendary Vinland, so thoroughly described in the sagas. Upon arriving in these parts, he began asking locals about ancient ruins, and fishermen, believing he was referring to indigenous sites, led him precisely to this location. They truly believed that the remains of indigenous settlements were located here. Undoubtedly, indigenous people inhabited this territory, but the discovered ruins had no connection to them. In the opinion of the explorer, who had limited experience in studying indigenous settlements, these ruins did not resemble a traditional indigenous camp. The long, massive walls and extensive stone masonry much more closely resembled military structures typical of Iceland or Greenland. This was precisely the impression Dr. Ingstad had when he first saw these structures. They seemed familiar to him. The explorer was informed that this site was discovered in 1960 and later underwent thorough reconstruction. It undoubtedly bears a striking resemblance to other Norse settlements he had seen in both Iceland and Greenland. However, the main purpose of his presence here was to find irrefutable proof of the saga's truth. Archaeological data, combined with radiocarbon dating of materials extracted from this site, indicates the settlement's age to be approximately 1,000 years. This perfectly aligns with the period when, according to the sagas, Leif Erikson, known as Leif the Lucky, arrived in these lands. Indeed, the sagas recount the beginning of voyages to Vinland around 998 to 1000 AD, and these dates perfectly coincide with the archaeological evidence found. What exactly was dated? Numerous wooden artifacts found at the site, as well as materials directly related to ship repairs, and charcoal used for iron smelting. Notably, iron was indeed produced here. This is the first known site in North America where metallurgical work was conducted. Iron was smelted in special furnaces to obtain workable metal. The metal found at Lance-aux Meadows was used to make rivets or nails needed for ship repairs. It is known that Native American cultures did not possess metalworking technologies. This circumstance further confirms the direct connection of this site to other Scandinavian settlements. The size of this settlement and the presence of traces of iron production. All these facts convincingly point to its Scandinavian origin. What else was discovered? A number of artifacts were found at this site that directly indicate Scandinavian cultural affiliation. For example, archaeologists discovered a bronze ring, which was used as a cloak fastener on the shoulder. Also found was a spindle whorl, a small, round object made of soapstone, which was attached to the end of a spindle to spin wool into yarn. This is another characteristic Scandinavian or Icelandic household item. However, only after the completion of all archaeological work did the totality of the evidence become absolutely clear. Archaeological data unequivocally confirm that Vikings lived here, on the extreme northeast of the American continent, now part of Canada. But did they explore territories further south, within the present-day United States? Archaeologists actively search for other Viking settlements, but have found nothing so far. Proof that they moved south emerged through amazing archaeological detective work. Butternut wood, also known as white walnut, grows in the northern U.S. and southern Canada, but it has never grown as far north as the Viking camp at Lance-aux Meadows. Researchers found butternut fruits at archaeological sites, in the cultural layer associated with the Scandinavian settlements. And they don't grow here? No, they never did. This means someone traveled a long way to collect them, and somehow they ended up here. Archaeologists are convinced that these butternut fruits were brought here specifically by the Vikings. They were found at the same level as the Viking ruins, and there is no evidence that the Vikings were trading with locals at that time. Thus, this was their base camp, which they used to explore the region. How far did they travel? They ventured deep into the St. Lawrence Gulf region, at least reaching the southern areas of New Brunswick. The butternut finds prove that the Vikings explored southern Canada and likely the northern United States. From archaeological data, it is also known that the Vikings stayed here for only 2 or 3 years. But why was their stay so short? The materials they could have taken back to Greenland were already available to them through established trade routes with Europe. Perhaps the journey to these lands was too long for them, and likely their efforts were not justified to continue coming here regularly. Undeniably, the Scandinavian seafarers possessed advanced technology for their time and unparalleled courage, sufficient to reach the shores of North America. However, approximately 1,000 years ago, they encountered lands that, as it seemed to them, offered nothing that was unavailable in their homelands. As a result of this realization, the Norsemen departed these shores. Soon, all evidence of their brief stay dissolved into the ages, remaining unseen for almost an entire millennium. Indeed, had it not been for the enduring sagas, such as the stories of Eric the Red and Leif the Lucky, carefully recorded in the celebrated Viking narratives, modern archaeologists likely would never have purposefully begun searching for traces of their presence on the vast American continent. Nevertheless, the accumulated evidence is now undeniable. The legendary Viking ship truly sailed and explored the coastline of North America, preceding Christopher Columbus's expedition by exactly 500 years.